I was born under skies that keep their secrets. In Minnesota, the cold can be cruel, but it's honest. It shows you what it means to survive without noise, without excuses. My name is Mara Dahl, and for 33 years I worked as a nurse at St. Brigit's Clinic, a little brick building tucked between the feed store and the post office. People said I had a gift for keeping quiet, for listening, the way a doctor listens to lungs. Maybe that's why, when the truth finally surfaced, it chose my hands to rise through. Our town, in the early 2000s, was the kind of place that looked innocent from a postcard. Red barns, white fences, frozen lakes. Sunday services where everyone smiled the same polite smile. The kind of place where gossip traveled quicker than ambulances, yet no one called it gossip, we called it concern. I lived in a blue-roofed house just off Birch Road, with a porch swing that creaked even when the air stood still. My husband, Tom Dahl, had left in '97, saying he was better off somewhere that didn't expect him to stay the same. After that, it was just me, the clinic, and the quiet. I used to think silence was safety. Turns out, silence can be a slow-burning fuse. That winter, January 2003, came in like an old grudge. One night, around 9 p.m., the clinic door banged open, bringing a rush of snow and the sheriff's boy, Eli, 16, pale as a page, with a bloody T-shirt tied around his arm. The sheriff followed, his voice too loud for the small waiting room. "Table saw accident. Coach says he'll live." He smiled like men do when they need the room to believe them. I cleaned the cut and stitched it neat. Eli tried to talk sports to keep from shaking. When it was done, I sent a small sample to the lab. Routine procedure, nothing special. At least that's what I thought. An hour later, the phone rang. "Discrepancy," the lab tech said. "Type O positive on file, but the test reads AB negative. You want a rerun?" I remember the hum of the fluorescent light above me and how it flickered once, like a breath caught in a throat. I told her to test again. She did. Same result. Blood doesn't lie. It whispers, but it never lies. The birth record from 1990 said O positive, signed off by T.D., Tom Dahl, my ex-husband. He'd been the hospital's lab technician then. I still had his old coffee mug at home, world's best analyzer. He liked facts neat and people complicated. The thought of his initials under that record made my stomach turn slow and deliberate like ice shifting under the lake. Dr. Singh, our new physician, stood beside me as we stared at the file. "Could be a chart mix-up," she offered. "Or it could be a story someone didn't finish telling," I said. We locked the drawer and agreed to wait for confirmation. Waiting. That's what small towns do best. We wait, we pretend, we bake bread so no one smells the smoke. 2 days later, a perfect blue sky returned, too clean, too sure of itself. The lab confirmed the mismatch again. I knew then the truth had legs. That Sunday at church, I saw the sheriff's family 2 pews ahead. His wife, Anne, once my closest friend, tucked the strand of hair behind her ear the same way she used to when we were girls. Eli sat straight, the white of his bandage peeking from his sleeve. The hymn book trembled in my hands. After service, the mayor told me my brownies had been the talk of the carnival. I smiled, because in towns like ours, smiling is the only way to keep from freezing. That afternoon, I found an envelope under my door. No stamp, just my name in block letters. Inside, a photocopy of a birth certificate. The father's line blank, the mother's name was Ann Carver, and at the bottom, the same initials, T.D. A yellow sticky note clung to the corner. You were the only honest one in that room. I read it once, twice. My hands smelled of paper and fear. I set the note beside Tom's old letter in the blue ceramic bowl on my kitchen table, both written by men who knew too much about leaving things unfinished. That night, I sat on the porch swing. The cold gnawed at my knees, but I stayed, listening to the wind shift through the trees. That sound before a secret speaks. You learn after 58 years that truth doesn't arrive like thunder. It comes quiet, like thaw. And thaw may look gentle, but it breaks what the ice once held together. Tell me in the comments, have you ever held a secret you didn't ask for? If you've ever chosen silence to keep the peace, tap the heart so I know you're here. Do you believe truth can heal? Or does it only expose what was already broken?
The girl in the red parka couldn't have been more than 17. Her cheeks burned pink from the cold, her breath clouding the air between us. When she said my name, "You're Mara Dahl, right?" It sounded less like a question, more like a password she wasn't sure she had permission to use. I nodded, still holding the edge of the door. "Who sent you?" She hesitated. Then, softly, "Nobody who wants to be named." There are certain tones you only hear in small towns, the mix of defiance and fear that means someone's about to hand you something heavy and walk away before it breaks them. She handed me a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a photocopy. Another one. This time of a clinic log sheet. The same date as Eli's blood test, my signature at the bottom. Only the middle row, the part listing who handled the sample, was crossed out in thick black marker, and under it, written in pen, "You didn't see this." I felt my pulse in my jaw. The girl glanced behind her, as if someone might be watching from across the street. She said, "I have to go." "Wait, what's your name?" She swallowed. "Lucy." Then quieter, "Anne Carver's niece." Anne, the sheriff's wife. My old friend, the one whose name was on that birth certificate. The porch swing groaned in the wind as Lucy turned and ran down the street, her red coat flashing like a warning light between the snowdrifts. I stood there for a long time after she disappeared, the cold seeping into my bones until it hurt to breathe. Because what she'd given me, and the way she said it, told me everything the paper didn't. This wasn't a mix-up anymore. This was a cover-up. And somewhere inside that story was my ex-husband's name. That night I took out the blue bowl again. 2 letters, 2 ghosts. Tom's handwriting looked steady as ever, like a man who thought he could organize the world into right and wrong by lining up his pen just so. I whispered into the empty room, "What did you do, Tom?" The radiator popped in reply, like punctuation. At the clinic the next morning, Dr. Singh noticed the shadows under her eyes. "You didn't sleep." I said, "Some truths don't let you." She didn't press. Maybe she already knew which file had begun to hum under the drawer. Around noon, the sheriff walked in. The snow on his boots melted into the tile, leaving dark marks like guilt. He smiled, all official warmth. "Doc Singh around?" I said, "She's out on call." He said, "Then maybe you can help me." He set his hat down on the counter. "Heard there was a little hiccup with my boy's test. Thought I'd stop by, make sure it's cleared up." My hands wanted to tremble, but I tucked them under the desk. I said, "It's being rechecked, routine." He looked at me for a beat too long, the kind of look men give when they sense you know something they wish you didn't. He said, "You've always been a straight shooter, Mara." He smiled, that politician's smile. "Just don't let rumors start flying, you hear? Small towns, they eat their own." He turned and left, the bell above the door jingling like irony. That night I drove out to Miller's Pond, the kind of place people meet when they don't want to be seen. The letter had told me to. Yes, another letter. It had arrived that afternoon, slipped under my windshield wiper this time. Same block letters, same sharp edges. Tonight, 7 p.m., Miller's Pond. Come alone. I parked under the old oak, where the snow always drifted deeper. The lake was half frozen, the water groaning beneath its own reflection. A figure stepped out from the trees, scarf wrapped high, gloved hands shoved deep in pockets. "Lucy," she said, "you shouldn't have come." I said, "You asked me to." She looked down at her boots. "He's watching everyone. My aunt says he checks the phone bills." I said, "The sheriff?" She nodded. "She wanted to tell you herself, but she can't. She said to give you this." She handed me a manila envelope. Inside, photos. Grainy, printed from an old Polaroid. The maternity ward at St. Brigit. The date corner read, June 1990. In the picture, a newborn, a tired young mother, Ann Carver, smiling weakly. And beside her, not the sheriff, but Tom Dahl, my husband at the time, standing too close, his hand on Ann's shoulder, the same steady pen in his breast pocket. I closed my eyes. The cold didn't hurt anymore. What hurt was how familiar it looked, that quiet, clinical tenderness he'd used on me once. Lucy whispered, "My aunt said your husband changed the father's name in the records to cover for the sheriff, something about saving reputations, but she doesn't know whose reputation was really being saved." I shook my head, trying to catch up. "Are you saying the sheriff isn't Eli's father?" Her voice cracked. "No, ma'am, he's not." The pond groaned louder, as if echoing her words. I felt the world shift under my boots, that same quiet cracking sound from the lake in springtime, the kind that warns you, step carefully, or you'll go under. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark kitchen and listened to the refrigerator hum. Somewhere in town, people were folding laundry, watching sitcoms, planning Sunday dinners, believing their lives were ordinary, but mine had just split open. The man I'd once loved had faked a record to hide another man's lie, and the child I'd bandaged that week had no idea who his real father was. And I, the nurse who kept everyone's secret safe, was holding the one secret that could shatter the town.
I thought of Anne, my friend, living beside that man all these years, raising a boy whose eyes were her own, whose blood told another story. What kind of silence must that have cost her? Have you ever realized you were living inside someone else's cover story? Tell me in the comments if you've ever felt that, the moment the curtain lifts and the world you thought you knew doesn't fit anymore. Tap the heart if you know what it's like to keep the peace when truth is begging to speak. Sometimes silence isn't cowardice. It's the sound of someone measuring the damage. 2 nights later, a patrol car started parking outside my house. Not every night, but enough for me to notice. The sheriff was smart. He wouldn't threaten outright. He'd just remind me that he knew I knew. I began leaving my porch light on, even when I wasn't home. I wrote down everything, names, dates, the blood types, in my old nursing logbook. I wrapped it in plastic and hid it under the porch boards. Because when a truth this sharp moves through a quiet town, someone always tries to bury it again. One evening, Anne came by. No makeup, no pretense. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if years of pretending had carved her down to essentials. "Mara," she said, voice shaking, "I don't know what you've been told." "I know enough." Her eyes filled. "Please, if he finds out I spoke to you, he already knows something's wrong. He's watching." She nodded, defeated. Then quietly, "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." She sat at my table, the same spot where Tom's letter still rested in the bowl. I poured her tea. Neither of us touched it. She told me everything. How Tom had comforted her during a rough pregnancy while the sheriff was away for training. How rumors started, how she panicked when Eli was born and his blood type didn't match her husband's. How Tom changed the records to protect her and maybe himself. "Did you love him?" I asked. She stared into the tea. "I thought I did for 5 minutes of my life, and I've been paying for it ever since." When she left, I walked her to the porch. The snow had started again, soft flakes landing on her coat like absolution. She turned back once. "Mara, you always told the truth. Maybe that's why it found you." When she drove off, her tail lights bled red against the white road, a wound that didn't close. That night, I stood at my window and looked over our sleeping town. Every house glowed like a lantern, trying to pretend it wasn't afraid of the dark. I realized then, truth doesn't just shock people, it rearranges them. And somewhere in that rearranging, justice begins to take shape. Slow, quiet, inevitable. Because secrets may live long lives in Minnesota, but even ice remembers how to melt. Have you ever realized you were living inside someone else's cover story? Tap the heart if you ever kept quiet, not out of fear, but out of mercy. Would you have told the town or waited like I did? Sometimes silence isn't cowardice. It's the sound of someone measuring the damage. Some truths don't explode. They seep slowly, patiently, like a thaw that creeps under every closed door, softening the edges until even the locks start to forget why they were there. After Anne left my porch that night, the snow kept falling, quiet, endless. By morning, it had covered her footprints completely. The town looked peaceful again, but I knew better. Beneath that calm, something had shifted. I spent the next few days pretending nothing had changed. I brewed coffee at the clinic, checked blood pressures, replaced the waiting room magazines. But every knock, every phone ring made my pulse stutter. Because I knew, and the sheriff knew that I knew. The first crack came quietly, like everything else in Minnesota. A letter arrived at the clinic, no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Tom, my ex-husband, standing beside the sheriff, both men smiling in front of St. Brigit's sign. On the back, written in the same block letters as before, "This town was built on favors." I felt the world tilt slightly, because favors are just debts with better manners, and I'd seen too many men collect them like trophies. Dr. Singh caught me staring at the picture during lunch. "You're somewhere else," she said. "Just remembering," I replied. "Whatever you're remembering," she said gently, "don't carry it alone." I wanted to tell her everything about the blood, the birth record, the sheriff, Tom, the letters, but I couldn't because in small towns, even the walls take sides. That weekend, the town hosted its annual winter charity auction at the school gym. Everyone showed up. The mayor, the church choir, the sheriff and his wife, smiling as if their lives had never cracked. I sat near the back, trying to be invisible. When they auctioned a quilt stitched by the ladies at the parish, Anne stood up to present it. Her hands trembled only once when her eyes met mine. For a moment, the air between us held everything we hadn't said. And then it happened. A man near the front, the mayor's cousin, a man known for drinking more than he donated, raised his hand and said, half joking, "Careful, Sheriff, don't let your nurse friend here check that blood type of yours again." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, just thoughtless. But in a town like ours, one careless joke can become prophecy. I saw the sheriff's jaw tighten, his wife's smile flicker, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. A man's voice, low, controlled. "You're stirring ghosts, Mara." "Who is this?" "Doesn't matter. For your sake, stop talking." Then a click. The kind of silence that leaves an echo. I sat for a long time, phone still in my hand, the dial tone humming like a heartbeat. I realized whoever had called wasn't just threatening me. They were warning me that the story I'd stepped into went deeper than a paternity secret. This wasn't just about a child. It was about power and the men who used it to keep their names clean. The next morning, the sheriff didn't come to work. By noon, half the town knew he'd fallen ill. By evening, someone whispered that he'd gone to stay with relatives for a while. That's how small towns handle scandal, not with confession, but with vacation. But I wasn't fooled. The letters, the photos, the threats, someone was moving pieces behind the curtain. And then came the fire. It started just after midnight, a thin column of smoke rising from the back of St. Brigit's clinic. By the time the volunteers arrived, the storage room was gone. So were the patient records. The next day, they called it faulty wiring, but I'd been there too long to believe it. That room hadn't had power in years. And among the ashes, I found the corner of a burned file folder. On it, faint but visible, the letters E.C. Eli Carver. Someone wanted this truth erased for good. When I told Dr. Singh, she covered her mouth, whispering, "Dear God!" I nodded. This wasn't an accident. She looked at me, steady, brave. "Mara, do you still have your own copies?" I hesitated, then told her about the hidden logbook under my porch. She smiled faintly. "Then the story's not dead yet." That night, I went out into the cold and dug it up. The snow had crusted hard, like the town itself, white, clean, brittle. My hands were shaking by the time I found it, the old notebook wrapped in plastic, safe, still humming with everything people wanted buried. Inside were the test results, the blood types, and at the bottom, a note I hadn't written. It read, "You were right to keep it safe. Now use it." There was no signature,
But I knew the handwriting. Tom. My ex-husband had known someone would come for the truth and left me the key to it. The next morning I called Anne. I said, "We can't keep this buried." She didn't argue. She just whispered, "Then it's time." We met at the frozen lake, the same one where I'd spoken with Lucy weeks earlier. The air was brittle and blue. Anne handed me a small envelope. Inside, a confession letter in her handwriting. She'd written all about it. The affair, the false record, the sheriff's threats, the years of silence. She said, "I'm done pretending. Maybe the truth will finally set someone free, even if it isn't me." I felt tears freeze against my skin, and I said, "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I'm tired of living under borrowed names." We mailed copies of her letter to the county office, the church, the local paper. We didn't wait for courage. We just did it. And then we waited. For the thaw, for the storm, maybe both. 3 days later, the news spread faster than the wind. Sheriff Carver resigns amid scandal. The paper didn't print the full story. They never do. But everyone knew. By evening, the mayor had called for a review. Dr. Singh told me the clinic was under temporary closure for inspection. I knew that meant scrutiny, suspicion, and perhaps freedom. That night, I walked to the lake again. The ice had begun to crack, wide, gentle lines spreading across the surface. The sound was low and steady, like the count exhaling after years of holding its breath. I whispered, "Let it break." Because sometimes you don't fight to keep things standing. You fight to let them finally fall. The snow finally melted that April. Not fast. Minnesota never rushes. It loosened in sheets, slipped from the roofs, ran in silver ribbons down the ditches. The lake cracked open like a slow confession, and with every drop, the town changed shape. People stopped talking to me for a while. Some crossed the street. Some lowered their voices when I passed. Others, mostly women, looked me in the eye and nodded, like they were thanking me for something they couldn't say aloud. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't just divide a town. It reveals who's already been standing apart. The sheriff moved away quietly. No headlines after that. Just absence. Anne sold their house and took Eli to Duluth. Before she left, she came by the clinic, which had reopened under new management. She looked lighter somehow, like a woman finally breathing her own air. She pressed a small envelope in my hand. "For you," she said. Inside was a photo of Eli on the lakeshore, grinning at the camera, wind in his hair. On the back, she'd written, "He knows now, and he forgives us both." I didn't realize I was crying until the ink blurred. As for me, I left St. Brigit's soon after. I'd spent too many years behind those walls, holding other people's secrets in my pocket. I started working part-time at the library instead, cataloging books, labeling spines, restoring quiet stories. It suited me. Sometimes people whisper there, but the words stay gentle. My house still stands on Birch Road. The porch swing still creaks, but the sound doesn't ache anymore. Some evenings I sit there with tea and let the light fade over the lake. And when the air turns cold again, because it always does, I remind myself that I survived the kind of winter that doesn't end on the calendar. A few months later, I received a letter, handwritten, shaky. It was from Tom, mailed from a small town in Idaho. He wrote, "I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to be brave back then. I thought silence was protection. You taught me it was avoidance. I'm sorry for all the paper I signed to make other people look good. You were the only honest one in that room. I just didn't realize it soon enough." There was no return address, just a postmark fading at the corners. I burned the letter gently in my kitchen sink, then opened the window to let the smoke out. It smelled like closure. That summer, I planted a lilac bush by the porch, my first in years. When it bloomed, the air filled with that familiar sweetness, the kind that only lingers when you've waited long enough. Sometimes the neighbors stop to admire it. They call it the Dahl bush. I don't correct them. The town still tells the story, in pieces. Some say it was about scandal. Others say corruption. A few call it courage. But I know it was none of those things exactly. It was about truth finally finding its voice after years of whispering through the snow. You see, truth isn't loud. It's patient. It sits in drawers, in letters, in the hands of people like me, waiting to be picked up gently like a fragile photograph. And when it finally stands, it doesn't demand applause. It simply changes the air. These days, when I look back, I don't feel anger anymore. Just understanding. We were all trying to survive the same blizzard, some of us by covering windows, others by lighting candles. And maybe that's enough grace for one lifetime. Because here on True Life Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember them. Subscribe, stay with us, and help the silence end, one true story at a time.